What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and today we'll be talking about Poison. And no, not the band, though they are pretty good. Since now all three specs of Rogue have access to poisons once again, I figured it might be a fun sort of introductory episode for non-lethal poisons for those who haven't used them before, covering how they work and how they'll benefit us in various PvE situations. So while I may want nothing but a good time, how can I resist not working an 80s hairband pun into an intro when I'm talking about poison? Let's get into it. As always, this video will be segmented out into various topics, and if you have any additional questions to ask about that isn't covered, then feel free to leave a comment below or hit me up on my community Discord. The link to that is in the description for this video. I'll first start with a brief explanation of our poisons, then go over specifically what interactions our non-lethal poisons will have in our toolkit. As a heads up, this will not be covering any PvP interactions and is strictly focused on PvE. Most of this will just apply to dungeons, though there is an instance of raid utility here and there as well. Poisons are split into lethal and non-lethal varieties, and you can wear one lethal and one non-lethal at the same time. For Outlaw and Subtlety, you'll have access to instant poison and wound poison for your lethal options. For Assassination, you'll get deadly poison and wound poison as yours. Though this video isn't focused on the lethal poisons, I'll go over them really quickly. Basically, you'll always want either instant poison or deadly poison active, depending on what specialization you're in. These are both simple flat damage increases, so just keep them active, and for Assassination you really need to keep it active because it works into how you generate energy for your spec. So yeah, make sure you have your poisons on, guys. Wound poison is primarily focused on PvP usage, as it does less damage than your other lethal poison, however it does reduce the amount of healing that your target can receive. There are some potential situations where wound poison could be useful in PvE, though the likelihood of that isn't very high, so just make sure you have instant or deadly poison active depending on your spec. For non-lethal poisons, we have access to both Crippling and Numbing poison. Crippling poison is a simple slow effect, causing enemies afflicted by it to be slowed by 50% for 12 seconds. Outlaw and Subtlety will have a 30% proc chance for Crippling poison, and due to passive benefits that Assassination receives while leveling, their proc chance is 50%. Crippling poison is generally seen as the less favorable non-lethal poison to use in PvE, mainly because by slowing enemies down, it can sometimes separate a group of enemies being kited to the point where you won't be able to cleave them all down evenly. There are still some times where Crippling poison can be quite useful though, which I'll cover in just a moment. Our other option is Numbing poison. This reduces the cast speed and attack speed of all afflicted targets by 15% for 10 seconds. This again has a base proc chance of 30%, increasing to 50% exclusively if you're Assassination. Of the two of these, Numbing poison is the go-to in virtually all PvE situations. Reducing attack speed and cast speed of enemies is pretty potent, especially if it helps give you a little bit of extra time to interrupt a cast before it goes off, and it also helps slow down some of the auto attacks that might be pelting you or your tank in the face depending on how well your tank is doing. While these poisons are both useful sounding, they have an added layer of utility behind each of them. The Shiv ability allows us to apply a concentrated version of whichever of these two non-lethal poisons we have active. For Crippling poison, this allows us to apply a 70% slow on our target for 5 seconds. And while rogues are pretty well known for having exceptional utility and crowd control, Numbing poison ups the ante even further, because when you shiv somebody with Numbing poison on, you remove all Enrage effects from them. This is monumentally potent in some dungeons, as there are several bosses or enemies in general that will have Enrage dispels that should be taken care of immediately. An excellent example is the first boss in the Theater of Pain, the Affront of Challengers. Decia the Decapitator has an Enrage effect that gives her a shield equal to 30% of her maximum health, and while the shield is active, she will fixate on a random player. With a Numbing poison shiv though, we can remove this shield, saving a ton of time and headache in this boss fight. The Amarth fight in Necrotic Wake also has an Enrage effect called Unholy Frenzy, which causes a 50% attack speed increase for 16 seconds or until the Enrage is removed, which your tank will immensely appreciate you taking that off for him. And no, not like that. This is a family-friendly channel, you're gonna get me demonetized like that, go away! Anyways, there are many trash mobs in dungeons with Enrage removals as well, such as the Risen Warlords and the other side with their Undying Rage cast, or the Raging Tantrum cast by the Raging Bullhorn right at the beginning of the Theater of Pain dungeon. There are lots of other enemies that have Enrage removals throughout the Shadowlands dungeons, but even if it's not part of the ad or boss's normal mechanics, there is another very important time that Enrage's spells are amazing, the Raging affix for Mythic Plus. This causes any non-boss enemies below 30% health to deal 100% more damage until they die, or their Enrage effect is removed, so this is extremely important to remember since some ads hit like a truck, and with raging they'll hit like 2 trucks instead. Crippling Poison doesn't see quite as much prolific usage in dungeons, and there are a couple reasons why, though I do know a few times you might want to consider running it. As I mentioned earlier, Crippling Poison causes enemies to become spread out due to some being slowed and others not, which can make AoEing a group of enemies that your tank is pulling into the next group a bit cumbersome. It can also be absolutely detrimental if you leave Crippling Poison on during Sanguine weeks, since that is intentionally giving your trash packs way more time to wade through all that red healing jelly on the ground. However, depending on your tank and if they want you to do it, you can use Crippling Poison to some effect on necrotic weeks, as by slowing large groups of enemies at once, you can give the tank the few extra seconds that they need for their stacks of necrotic to fall off. That 70% slow you can apply with Shiv can be pretty handy for this too if you have one particular enemy that is punching their face in, though again, the instances where Crippling Poison is used over numbing are few and far between for dungeon-oriented content. You might be able to get some more usage out of it in Castle Nathria during the Sun King's redemption fight, if your group is really lacking slows for the soul infusers that bum rush Kale Sauce halfway through the fight. And while this is probably a bit of information that won't affect that many rogue players, I do have one gripe with this immense utility that we've gained with these non-lethal poisons and Shiv effects. Assassination had Toxic Blade removed in the pre-patch for Shadowlands, and instead Shiv was turned into a weaker version of the popular talent. This means that for all 50 Assassination rogues still out there, you can't just go shivving all willy-nilly for utility benefits like Outlaw and Subtlety can, since anything you apply Shiv to will take 20% increased nature damage for 9 seconds, meaning you're going to want to DPS it for that 9 seconds, if it wasn't the primary target in the first place. Or, more likely, you already have Shiv on cooldown because you're using it on cooldown as a DPS buff. If you're running the well-placed Steel Conduit, this is an even larger DPS loss to just throw Shiv around for utility only. Now, I know Assassination is kinda the odd man out of the 3 specs currently, but it's just really disappointing to see a nice utility benefit only be truly 100% effective for 2 of the 3 specs is all. I hope this little rundown of the various ways our non-lethal poisons can be used in PvE content, as well as a few things in particular you should be keeping an eye on, will help you out. If this information is useful to you, then maybe consider leaving a comment or a like, as it's greatly appreciated and helps so much with the channel's growth. I cover a pretty wide variety of content on the channel every weekday, so I should hopefully have some other useful bits of info for you to peruse through if you're new around here. As always, my gratitude to my regular viewers, commenters, subscribers, and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.